So today I'm joined by a man of faith, principle, and conviction, Brad Sherman, pastor, businessman, and candidate for governor of Iowa. Brad has served as a state representative, helped lead pro life medical initiatives, and brings decades of leadership to the table. Brad, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be
Thanks
with
for
you,
joining
Oliver.
us today. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
You know, I was looking at your website and I saw Restoring the Foundations of Freedom. And I thought, that's my guy right there. I don't know if you can see that sign up there.
Oh, yeah.
Iowans for Freedom.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, that's not just a cliche. That's been my heartbeat for over 4 decades.
Yep.
That's what I'm all about.
Yeah, I ran on building a better Iowa, but I've struggled with putting freedom in there because that's one of my number one things is, freedom of choice, freedom of religion, freedom of being a U.S. citizen and not having over regulations and, I come from a bit of a libertarian background in that respect. And so when I saw that, I really appreciated it. And, it seems like your campaign centers around restoring Iowa to its constitutional foundations. Now, what does that look like practically?
Well, the one thought was coming to my mind when you were talking about freedom. And, what some people don't realize is that liberty can only exist under law. I mean, if we don't have some law, then we're going to have chaos. And so there are always rules and laws that have to be followed to produce the best level of freedom or liberty, that we have. And so that's why we have the Declaration of Independence. It talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the framework for our Constitution, which is a set of laws, the supreme law of our land. And so, and that gets into the whole issue of a republic versus a democracy and all these different things. So that's a big issue.
And you always hear people say, well, we're a democracy, but we're actually a constitutional republic. And what does that mean? And what is the difference in that?
Well, the founders called it a democracy, an evil form of government. They called it capricious and it was unstable. And because it was mob rule, 51% of anybody, any group, can then overrule the minority. So what in a true democracy, minorities get killed. They get run over. And so, but what the founder set up was a republic, which is a representative form of government that is ruled by law. I hear lawmakers all the time, even friends of mine say, well, it's whatever the people want back home. That's what I have to represent. Well, to some degree, in the fact that they elected you, but they elected you in a republic expecting you to go and do the right thing according to law. And so the first example of a republic was actually when the children of Israel came out of Egypt and Moses was judging them all, and his father-in-law said, well, you can't handle this all yourself. So you're going to have to, appoint leaders of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. And they said, select from among yourselves faithful men who are honest, et cetera, et cetera. And it says that Moses taught them the law, and then they could take care of all the smaller issues and the bigger ones they brought to Moses. So that was a representative form of government that decentralized government, and it was the first example of a republic. And so our Constitution actually is based on the biblical principle of Isaiah 33:22, which says, the Lord is our judge, our king, and our lawgiver. I'm not sure I got that in the right order there, but those three things represent the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And so that's the first 3 articles of our Constitution. So anyway, that's just a little bit about the difference between a republic and a democracy.
Well, that's interesting, and that kind of leads me to my next question. You've spent decades in ministry. How has that shaped your leadership philosophy? And I can kind of see that in that answer.
Yeah, well, the Declaration of Independence states it very clearly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to protect these rights, governments are instituted among men. So in those few words, we have a couple of references to God, and the paragraph before it talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. So God in our government is not some novel concept that religious people or religious fanatics are trying to push in. This was from the very foundation. But back to your question about how my years in ministry, when I first moved to Iowa City area and started a ministry on the college campus there, I saw immediately that we had all kinds of socialism and Marxism openly going on. And I saw firsthand how, particularly in our university settings, there was an outright disdain for Christianity and for people of faith. And so that was a battle from the very beginning. So that's when I really got involved in teaching biblical worldview and studying America's Christian history and promoting the ideas that became the founding that promoted the founding of our nation. And so, up here at the Capitol building, it's one of the things I say all the time. There's a block of granite over there by the Civil War Memorial, and it's got an engraving from George Mason, who was the father of the Bill of Rights. And it says, if free people do not examine their liberties and how they were obtained, they risk losing these rights. And so that became a passion of mine to try to teach those things. And I've had lots of, I guess you would say, mentors at a distance just from watching them. Not personal. I know David Barton personally, but not super close. But he's been a big inspiration to me and the history that he teaches. And Bill Federer, I consider him a friend. He's been to our church and spoken. He does the program called the American Minute. And so history is just absolutely essential. I think of John 8:14 that says, Jesus said, my witness is true because I know where I came from. That's our history, and where I'm going, and that's a vision for the future. So those are two elements that we have to have, a vision for the future, but we also have to understand our history. So,
Right. So why now? Why run for governor in 2026? I know it's not something you planned on, so why now?
Well, I was in the State House, and in June of 23, well, first of all, let me just say this. I never thought I would run for office. It just didn't feel like that was my calling. But I was teaching these principles, and people would say over the years, you should run. And then I saw there was a man he was a nice man, but he voted for some things that were totally opposite of what I believe in, and he was my state representative. And then I asked him one time why he voted for those things, and he was talking about how he stood. He told me he stood for these things, and then I said, but you voted against them. Why'd you do that? And he said, well, he probably forgot that I would remember.
Right.
And he said, well, just to get along. And so that's what happened. I decided then that I'm going to have to go. Somebody's got to run against this guy.
Right.
We don't need people in government that just do whatever there's got to be some principles there. They can't just go in there and just to get along with people. And just if the leadership or this person or that person tells you they want you to do this, that's not how government's supposed to work. And then we had the district that I was in. They redrew the lines, and when they redrew the lines, it turned out there was no incumbent. So that's when I jumped in the race and ran for State House. Now back to governor. The reason I served only one term, that's a question that comes up often. And that is, in June of 23, my daughter passed away, and unexpectedly and suddenly, and it shook us to the core. And so I finished my term, but we made plans to move to a different district to be close to our grandchildren. And so I recruited a guy to run in my place, a good guy. Judd Lawler ran, and he's now in the State House. I've known him for years and years. And so when people heard that I wasn't running, they began to say, well, you should run for governor. And at first, I didn't take it that seriously. But then more people started saying it. And then when we started praying about it, it was confirmed so many ways by God that I feel like it would be a disobedience to God if I didn't do this. I just knew in my heart that I was supposed to do this. And so my wife and I prayed about it. We both agreed. And so that's the short version of how we got here to be running for governor. And so that's what I told Governor Reynolds when I called her back in last November. I said, this is not about who's running and who isn't running. It's not because I have some big vendetta against you. I've always respected you, and I told her I was running because I owed her that respect. And so she told me that at the time she hadn't decided whether she would run or not. So
Yeah, I think that was a surprise for a lot of people that she announced that she was not running.
it was.
Yeah, even people I know in the House and the Senate that know her didn't really know that was going to happen. They were surprised.
Yeah.
And I can understand it. I mean, she had, her husband had been battling cancer, and I think he's doing better or well, but still, I mean, how long has she been the governor?
Yeah, that was one of my first concerns too. I hope that wasn't the result of bad news on
Right,
his part.
right.
And from what I've gathered, that's not the case. And so, I mean, they're
Yeah.
still watching that. But she finished out Branstad's term, and I think by the time she, and then she was when he went to be the ambassador for China, and then this will be her second term. So that I think when this term is finished, it will be about 10 years.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, she's been a great governor in a lot of ways. What's your stance or your approach to healthcare in Iowa, and what is Informed Choices Medical Clinics that you're involved in?
Well, Informed Choices Medical Clinic was an organization that I helped found. Was one of the co-founders, and it's a pro-life medical clinic. And one of the things that a lot of the pro-abortion people tend to say about pregnancy resource centers, they call them fake medical clinics or whatever. Well, our vision was to start a true medical clinic that had oversight with doctors. Now, obviously, there was limited services that we provided, and we didn't, we knew that we could only provide a limited amount of services, and so we had live 4D ultrasound and a few other things based on the medical staff that were largely volunteers. And so that we started that in Iowa City, and then there were 4 or 5 others around the state. Some of those went off on their own, and that's fine. So, but I was the co-founder, president, and board chair of that organization for 10 years. And it's been a while now since I've been there. And actually, one of the ones right here in Des Moines called Intervisions, we helped get that one started. But they went on their own pretty quickly, and I think they're still there and still doing a very good job. So I just feel honored to have had some small part in helping those things get going.
What will your approach to healthcare be for Iowa?
Well, I've been meeting with some people on healthcare because I know there's a lot of things that need to be addressed on that. I mean, all the way from the pro-life issue and abortion, all the way to the other end of life, which has to do with, euthanasia and medically assisted suicide. We have 9 states in America right now where assisted suicide is legal. And this year, 14 states had bills filed to make it legal. And that's kind of scary. Now, we even had one here in Iowa. Now, it didn't get any traction. I mean, nobody took it seriously. Thank God for that. But nevertheless, these things keep being pushed.
Was that filed by a Democrat or a Republican?
I'm pretty sure it was, from what I gathered.
Yeah, I don't think their bills get a lot of traction.
No, not at all. But the thing is, you take our neighbors to the north. I read an article where it said 1 in 20 deaths in Canada are the result of assisted suicide.
Really?
They have
1 in 20?
That's what I read.
Holy cow.
And they have a program up there called MAID, M-A-I-D. It's called Medical Assistance in Dying. And, if people are discouraged enough about a diagnosis, even young people, they can just sign up for MAID and rather than fight it. And then there was even discussion in this article I read by some people in Canada about establishing a protocol or maybe I don't know if it was mandatory or not, but for elderly and mentally ill people. And of course that's really scary because who gets to decide who's mentally ill and who gets to decide who's too old, and where do you draw the line? So this is a real issue. But those are the 2 ends of the spectrum. But in between is where we live for health care. And, mental health is a big issue right now. And then the people I've been talking to about medical reform has to do with just the crazy prices of medical procedures these days. I mean, I talked to a man who he was telling me he negotiates these things for people. He has a business that is a healthcare management business. And he said that his this one situation he worked with, it was a cochlear implant, I think, and if I remember correctly, the number was around $120,000 for this procedure. And he negotiated it down to like 25,000.
I have a friend that's in that industry as well, and it's insane some of the stuff that they see. And if I mean, you look at Medicaid, and they don't even negotiate if it's under $1 million. So there's all these claims like that are a million
Mm-hmm.
or 990 some thousand and less that are like that don't even get looked at the national level. And now at the state level, I have a daughter with type 1 diabetes, and it's so expensive for her insulin and all her medication and Dexcom stuff and everything else. It's just crazy. And then you pay, your insurance rates are so high. And you'll have somebody go in for, just say, a birth, and the anesthesiologist isn't in network because they mostly aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And they give them an epidural, and then they get a bill for $10,000 in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance company covers $1,500 of it or something like that. There's so much of that goes on. I think that's one of the number one bankruptcies is medical debt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have to do something for sure.
Well, this guy was telling me and explaining, and I kind of heard this before, but like this, take the situation I was describing, for instance, $125,000 for a procedure. Well, the price tag on it is double that, $250,000.
Wow.
And so $125,000, so the insurance companies will only pay 50%. So they price it at $250,000 so they can get $125,000. But when you really negotiate with them, you can get it for $25,000.
Right.
So that's kind of how this whole, and no wonder our insurance premiums are through the roof when that kind of stuff's going on. And there are a lot of middlemen involved in medicine, and so these are issues that really need to be looked at. And this person that I'm talking about was just I felt like a godsend to help.
Oh yeah.
As somebody who would really maybe be a source,
right,
to really help begin addressing these issues.
Yeah,
because
we need a special committee.
Oh yeah,
that just says, okay, here's the committee. This is your task. Kind of like the Doge for medical institutions and insurance and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's your stance on protecting parental rights in education?
Well, the ESA bill was passed, educational savings accounts. A lot of people I talk to call it vouchers. It's not technically a voucher. There's a difference. I think this money is a savings account that can be used for certain things, mainly tuition. But basically, I think it's a freedom issue. I mean, if people want to use their tax money to pay for a different school than the public school, why should we be forced to pay to put their children there? And that's what it boils down to, because if people are having trouble financially, then they're forced to use the public school. And what if they don't want to? Should some of their money be used for their choice? I think it should, because that's just a freedom issue.
For sure. I noticed you were really kind of on the front lines of the CO2 pipeline issue and eminent domain and private property rights. And there's a growing concern about government overreach. How would your administration address all of that?
Well, first off, I think most people, I think, understand what's going on with the CO2, but maybe we should just
let's talk about it.
Describe it.
Yeah.
So carbon capture pipeline is to catch CO2 that's being produced by ethanol plants and then condense it to a supercritical state, which is almost liquid, and then put it in a pipeline under high pressure, sometimes up to almost 3,000 pounds per square inch. Run it through a pipeline all the way up into South Dakota, where it gets buried in the ground to be forever out of our way. And of course, they've openly said that they're going to use that to help extract oil from the oil fields as well. It's similar to fracking. It's just to squeeze it out of the ground,
right?
Force it up. But the problem is, this is not a common carrier company. It's not a public utility. The product is not a public utility. And so it shouldn't qualify for eminent domain. And that's what's being pushed, is to use this for eminent domain. That's a strong, clear violation of property rights. And so, yeah, I was one of the early interveners when I was in the State House to say no against that. And that's been a real big campaign point for me. We have to protect our primary property rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is really all about property, or not all about it, but that's the big part of it.
It's kind of what separates us from being communists.
It is
owning property and private property.
Yeah, and so that's what the founders believed when they wrote The Pursuit of Happiness, was the right to enjoy the fruit of your own labors and own property. And so this is a big issue that's going on now. Now we can back up if you want and get into the conspiracy side of it, and I don't even consider it a conspiracy theory anymore, because, you know, as a friend of mine said once, I need some new conspiracy theories because all my old ones came true. You know? But
that's the truth, I think.
But CO2 is not a problem in our atmosphere. I mean, I believe in clean air and clean water just as much as anybody else. But CO2 is what plants need to grow. And we went to a conference out in Denver at the end of 23, and there were some retired scientists there, top-level scientists. And now that they're retired, they can speak without fear of losing their jobs. And so they, you know, and one of the things we learned was that the CO2 levels in our atmosphere at that time was measured generally around 420 parts per million. But they said, but anywhere from 400 to 1,200 parts per million is considered normal and optimal for plant growth. And so CO2 is not a problem. In fact, I had a top-level scientist here in our state tell me that he doesn't believe there's anything humans can do to produce enough CO2 that's going to hurt our atmosphere or create a problem. But he can't say that or he would lose his job. And so,
wow.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with this whole green movement.
You know, you just jarred a memory of mine. I remember sitting at your table. We were at the Conservative Energy Conference or something like that. Conservative Clean Energy Conference.
Over at the World Food Prize building.
Right. And you asked a great question. There was a guy from Omaha was giving a talk about wind energy. Mm-hmm. And you said something about, well, if it wasn't subsidized, is it something that you would recommend? And this guy was an economist, kind of a really, really smart guy, super smart. He said, no, I wouldn't. He said it doesn't, you know, there's not a net return on it, but there's all sorts of funding, so let's do it. But he admitted right there, you kind of challenged him, and he just agreed with you. He just said, yeah, if it wasn't subsidized, no, we shouldn't do it. But there's a subsidy, so yeah, let's do it. But the whole thing was about wind energy, and all these giant windmills blocking up our skylines and killing our birds, and, you know, that you can't, you know, dispose of.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that day. In fact, I remember part of his answer was, well, you can't really say that on these university campuses or they will eat you alive. That was his response.
Right.
Or part of his response. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an intimidation factor in our culture today that just prevents us from speaking the truth. You know, there's a quote, I think it's attributed to George Orwell. I looked it up. I'm not sure if that's accurate. Some people disagree that it was him. But basically it says this, that in a world filled with lies and deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. And so, you know, that's what it's like, speaking the truth. It's revolutionary. That's where we've gotten to in our culture.
I call it uncommon sense.
Yeah. You know, Mike Huckabee's a friend of mine. I called him a while back. I told him, you know, what I was thinking of doing for running for governor. And you know, he said the most dangerous person in the room, we were talking about this, is the person that doesn't know that he doesn't know. That was a good one. But he was also talking about when you go around maybe you go out to Iowa farm country, and you go into a small cafe out in farm country, and you see, the context was we were talking about President Trump, why he's so popular. He said, you go out here in farm country and you go to a little cafe and you see 4 farmers sitting around a little table nursing a cup of coffee, and And then suddenly they lean in close to one another and they say something quietly. Then they lean back and they all start nodding their heads. He says, "What they just said in quiet, Trump says out loud."
Right, right. Oh, yeah.
And so that's where we're at now. We have to say things out loud, and I think we're at a point in our culture where we can say things out loud that we couldn't say out loud before, at least without serious pushback.
Yeah, and I could see from your Facebook page that you're unapologetically MAGA, right?
Yeah, I think President Trump is called for this time in our history. I can probably find some things I don't agree with him on, and I don't worship him. I worship Jesus Christ, but I'm telling you, we need a guy that's got the backbone. I don't know of anybody I can think of that has the kind of backbone he has.
No, not at all. And I was slow to Trump. I didn't like him in 2016. Just his public persona. And I read his book, The Art of the Deal, and I was like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. Then by 2020, I was like, man, he's like knocking stuff up or 2018. I was a registered libertarian,
Mm-hmm.
and he was knocking all these things off my list. Really actually doing it. And
Yeah.
better trade deals, getting us out of the UN and the WHO. And I just thought, there's something different about him. And he comes from, and you look at all the videos from the past and the things he talked about when he was younger,
Mm-hmm.
about trade and about tariffs and about business in our country. And he's actually doing things that other presidents have talked about doing but have never done.
Well, it's refreshing, when politics do what they say they're going to do.
Well, and everybody gets in an uproar when they actually do it.
Yeah.
It's like you voted. He had a mandate. He said he was going to do all these things. Now he's doing them. What do you think about all the stuff going on with Tesla, all this backlash with Elon Musk for doing the right thing and trying to pull us from the cliff of complete bankruptcy?
It's almost hilarious in one sense because, he was the hero of the left, the electric cars, the green things, and now when he's talking from a business perspective and we got to save money, we can't just waste money. And, now they hate him and they're burning Teslas all over the place. It's like,
and now conservatives are buying electric cars.
Yeah, it's like a crazy flip.
To support Elon.
Yeah, it's just like you can't hardly make this stuff up. Who would have predicted that?
Ryan Binkley. I had the opportunity to interview a lot of the candidates when they came through, and I was the co-chair of the Dallas County Republican Party, the DC GOP. And he was such a nice guy. But I saw him post a video. He was in Dallas, or he was in Texas somewhere, and they were protesting Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, doing a little camera thing with his phone. And he said, they're chanting, "We need clean air, not another billionaire," against the guy that's done more for clean air in the U.S. than anybody on the planet.
Yeah.
So it's just audacious. I feel like people are so brainwashed. They watch CNN and MSNBC and ABC and all the liberal run media, and it's insane.
Yeah, I have to look up his Facebook page. I know Ryan. He's
a good guy.
He's a great guy. Yeah.
Very spiritual too. I mean, a good Christian.
Yeah.
Just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Super nice guy. How will you deal with that if you're elected as governor? One of the things I think we've lost the narrative as Republicans. We've got the Des Moines Register and all the local media outlets that just trash Republicans, everything that they try to do. Is there any way we can ever win that media battle, that narrative battle? Because sometimes we'll win the policy battle, but then we lose the narrative.
Well, a lot of people are waking up and they don't believe it anymore.
Right.
And so it may take a while to happen, but just things like you're doing right here. These are alternative media sources. And the more people get plugged in and tuned in to these types of things, the less influence those media outlets have. And so truth has a way of rising to the top. And, it's just one of those things that I think eventually humans will begin to discern what's true and what isn't, and they'll connect the dots. And so I'm looking forward to that. I mean, that's part of why Trump is really so successful, is because there's a whole alternative media out there. I mean, we see a major source right now. When you mentioned Elon Musk, he bought Twitter. It's now X, but I mean that was a major shift in how people get information about what's going on in our culture.
Yes, it is. And I was going to mention that as well. Trump did all the podcasting, with like Joe Rogan and all the big, who has, 10 times the followers of CNN. CNN will have a 40,000 viewed episode and his will be like 7 million or something like that. So yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I hope that we can, and I know that a lot of Democrats voted Republican in this last election because they were tired of, for the first time, because they were tired of the status quo. So I hope that continues, into 26. Do you feel like as a midterm election that it'll be more of a challenge than if it were during a Republic or like a presidential election?
Well, I don't know, but I think the fact that, at least for here in Iowa, the fact that Governor Reynolds has stepped out is going to draw a lot of attention. So I feel like it's going to get a lot of more media attention than normal.
Right.
Maybe even on a national scale. I mean, I got a call today from the Washington Post and did a short interview on the phone. So, I mean, they're starting to watch this, and see what's going to happen here. So we'll see.
So you announced pretty early.
Yeah, like I said, I knew I was going to do it. I told Governor Reynolds and a few, back in November. I had been telling a few friends, so I wanted to tell her before she heard the rumor, just out of respect. But our official announcement, and I filled out my paperwork and what have you for the committee and all that stuff in December. And then on February 17th, I think it was, we sent out a major press release. And then on the 22nd, we did a launch event up in Mason City, which was well attended and very encouraging. So yeah, we're officially early, I guess.
So how does it work to get the nomination? I mean, other people are going to step out. Some people that are already, in the public, whatever. Some people that might have more support by the party, who knows? How do you deal with that? And then what are the mechanics of it?
Well,
of getting the nomination.
Different people take different approaches. I mean, my approach is just talk to whoever I can, but really it's mainly a grassroots approach. And that's why I wanted to start early. I want to go out and talk to people face to face, answer questions, learn things. Nobody knows everything. I mean, one of my promises for this campaign is that if I make a mistake, I'll admit it as governor.
Right.
Because it seems like no politician ever wants to admit a mistake. They just ignore it or gaslight us over it. But the mechanics are: you go out, you fill out your basic papers for a committee, and of course that's how you raise funds, and money goes to that committee, and then you file that with the Iowa Ethics Campaign and Disclosure Board, and you report all that stuff to them, and stay above board to make sure that's all done properly, and then you start talking to people, and one of the big steps is to gather signatures. For governor in Iowa, we need 3,500 signatures, and at least 100 from 19 different counties. And so, of course, certainly we're going to go for more than that. But nevertheless, and then we move to the primary, which is June 2nd, 2026. And you have the primary election. And if you win the primary election, then you're automatically on the ballot for November.
And I don't think that people really understand how important the primaries are.
Yeah, that's what I run into all the time. Primaries are essential. And I think it's a healthy thing. I mean, when I ran for State House, I told you that the district lines had been drawn, so there was no incumbent. And so I thought when I jumped in, I was the first one to jump in then as well. And I thought, well, maybe nobody will jump in. It'll make it easy, because I was pretty new to campaigning. I'd helped a lot of campaigns, but to do it yourself, that's a different thing, So, but then another person jumped in, another one. So we ended up with a 6-way primary.
Oh my gosh!
It was the most.
Wow!
It was the most the people in a primary for the whole state. I think one other guy here in Dallas County had a 5-way primary.
I think that was Dan Gelbach.
It was.
He's
Dan.
A good friend of mine.
Yeah, I know Dan. Of course, I know Dan. He's a friend of my son.
Yeah.
And so, it was Dan. So, but anyway, six-way primary, do the math, that's about 16.6%. You know, if you split it 6 ways, and you have to have 35% to win. So anyway, we worked hard, just focused on our principles, and we ended up winning that primary with 55.5%.
Wow.
So, which was more than everybody else put together. So we didn't have to go to a convention, you know, and so we won that. But what was your question again?
I don't remember. Let me ask you this. What's the decision making like when you talk to your family about doing something like this? I mean, what's that conversation look like?
Yeah, well, that was a big conversation because first off, my wife, having run for House, my wife understood that there's a lot of work to this.
Oh yeah.
And a little House race, which is way different than a statewide race. And so we really weighed the options. Like, yeah, we pray and we feel like God's saying do this, but the work is going to be a big factor. And so we thought about all those things, but you know, sometimes that's what faith is. You just step out and you do things, and God helps us. And so then there are my children, of course. I think it took them a while to. It took them a while to just really grasp it. I think a lot of them, some of our kids, we got 4 children, counting our daughter who passed away. And so, but the 3 remaining children were, they just had that faraway look in their eyes at first.
Right, right.
And of course, they're thinking it through. They've got families, and they're thinking, how will this affect me? What if my dad is governor? How's this going to change my life? You know. But I don't know. I haven't thought about those things so much. I mean, honestly,
how do you know that God's calling you to run for governor?
Well, you know,
what does that mean?
People ask that, and you know, my wife and I have been walking with the Lord for over 50 years, and hearing God is never perfect, but at the same time, God has a way of putting things in your heart that you just know. It's not like we're hearing voices, you know.
Right.
And you know, but he puts things in our hearts. People say things. You know, there's lots of different things that they all add up to become convincing. And so this was not taken lightly, but we really believe that. So everybody hears God differently.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to I don't want to put that in a box.
Right.
So.
But you just know in your heart that
you just know in your
called.
heart. Yeah. I put it this way sometimes, that God put something in every one of us called a knower.
Right.
And some things you know, some things you don't know. There's a lot of decisions I've prayed about over the years that I wasn't sure about, you know. But I feel more confident on this than anything I think I've ever heard.
That's awesome.
So.
Well, how can people reach you, Brad?
Well, our website is sherman4iowa.com, and on the website is a form for a contact form or volunteer form, that sort of thing, and the emails come to me and to the team, but they come to me as well, and it's brad@sherman4iowa.com.
Okay.
And as for our email, so I mean, we've been getting bombarded, and for those that maybe don't get an answer quickly enough, I apologize, but you know, we're doing the best we can.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, and we've been around to lots of different county central committees as well too, and we've been getting good work, good reception. So, but yeah, that's how you get a hold of us.
Okay. And I want to thank you for joining us, for one thing, for driving out here and being on our show and doing what you're doing and doing what you've always done, which is basically stand for truth. There's going to be a heated primary. There's going to be a lot of people pop up. Why should they vote for you over the other options?
Well, I hope they will look at the things we're standing for. There are a lot of the issues that we touched on, the carbon capture pipeline and the eminent domain, the life issue. I mean, I think this idea, even though it's a general concept, restoring the foundations of freedom, I feel like that's been my life for so many years, for over 4 decades, that I feel like I have a unique qualification to see the big picture in these things. And that's really what I believe the governor's office has to do. You have to see the big picture, and you have to have a foundation that is unshakable. Because I've been in the State House, and there's something about that building up there that will really pressure you. And things are not always clear up there. I know I've lost sleep over a bill I voted for. You know, sometimes I wasn't sure if I voted the right way. And, you know, it's not always crystal clear. I mean, when you're out here in the grassroots and you hear about a bill, develop an opinion. But when you get in there and see all the details, there's lots of different aspects to consider. And so it's not an easy job. But I think seeing the big picture is part of it. And I think I've got a good handle on how government's supposed to work based on Scripture, based on Constitution, based on the Declaration. I think that's me.
All right. Well, God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, we're doing something different now. We're not done yet. You know, thank you for everything you shared so far. For those of you listening on Spotify or YouTube or other platforms, if you'd like to hang around, you can jump to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Oliver Bardwell. And you can listen to direct questions submitted by Iowans for Freedom in our Patreon community. Even a free membership gives you access to the rest of the conversation. For those of you already on Patreon, hang tight. We're jumping over there now. So thank you so much. And thank you so much.